Hello and welcome. My name is Trismegistus, and today we're going to be reading through and speculating about the latest Factorio Friday Facts. Friday Facts 395: Generic Interrupts and Train Stop Priority. Posted by Clonan. Hello, another Trains Friday Facts. Generic Interrupt. We first showcased the new schedule interrupts in Friday Facts 389. They allow you to control your trains using conditions and target destinations. We have played with schedule interrupts extensively, and they work very well for controlling larger numbers of trains and train systems. One small problem, annoyance, crime, is that you need to add an interrupt for each type of item manually. So, if you want the train to handle iron gear wheels, you need to create a new interrupt specifying if you have iron gear wheels, go to the iron gear wheel drop-off. The in-game screenshot here is captioned lots of interrupts, and as you can see, there are a lot of interrupts. This is also saying that train is in a group, is basically saying that train is in this group which has got all of these interrupts in it. And there are, as well as the sort of, what should we call them, systemic ones, the sort of, ones you need to do for, the way the train behaves, so a refueling and depot. You've also got then stations for every single raw resource, and, well, I suppose uranium's not on there, but, iron, copper, coal, stone, iron, plate, copper plate, all of everything there. There's no Easter eggs that I can see, by the way, but it looks like the users created the same interrupt for every single interrupt condition. So basically, if the item is iron gear wheels, is that if there are more than 0, so if the item of iron gear wheels is not equal to 0, and obviously it couldn't be negative, so this means it's got some iron gear wheels on it, then it goes to the iron gear wheel drop station and empties its cargo inventory. One of the things I was slightly confused on this by, if I'm totally honest, is that if a station was doing this, then maybe I'm just misinterpreting something, but to me this seems to be saying that if it's got any gear wheels in it at all, it will then head off to the drop-off. So if the train gets literally one iron gear wheel in it, is it not going to just immediately set off? I don't see what the full or no activity or what have you condition is. It's not saying, well, if you're full of iron gear wheels, or you've got more than 1,000, or there's been no activity at the station for X minutes or X seconds or what have you. So this literally seems to be saying that as soon as any gear wheels are put in, it will try to head off. So maybe the way they're controlling it is that the drop stations only open up when they want items, perhaps, and maybe it fills it up then. But I say this seems to be missing a condition to me. But yeah, maybe I'm just misunderstanding how they're doing the train schedule, which is fine. I would also say that, I suppose this is one of those examples of trying to give us lots of options of things to do, and how to play the game in the way that we want. But I would, if I was doing a system like this, I would probably be grouping trains up more. If you've got this train is in a group, maybe they've deliberately created this to emphasize the point, but I probably wouldn't have all of my trains. I'd probably want to manage my raw ore trains, and my iron and copper trains, and maybe my steel train, and group them together and just have trains that manage those sets. Although some of the things it does explain later maybe make that a bit more of a viable thing, just having everything together. But also what this goes on to explain just does sort of work around it anyway. It gets a bit boring and tedious adding new interrupts, and in our mind the goal is clear. If you have item X, go to X drop-off. X is any item, basically, is what they're saying. So these are all the same basic condition. If you've got a type of item of that type, then go to the drop-off for that type of item. So that is exactly what we did, using a new special wildcard signal called any item. The screen capture of the GUI then shows a generic interrupt using the any item signal. The any item signal is this one here, that looks like a circuit but with a sort of a box in it, grey box. Description, the hover over description says any item, special wildcard signal. When used in a schedule interrupt, it will match the first item that passes all wait conditions and replace the signal with that item. This also replaces the rich text tag in the target stop name. So they are literally creating a generic version of the interrupt, essentially, that by putting in this wildcard, this any item signal, that allows them to just say, right, well, whatever you've got in use in your contents, then go to that station. Now you might think, well, what about mixed contents? I personally don't tend to have a situation where I mix the contents of solid wagons unless we're talking about going to a wall restocking place or something like that. So that might be a use for this, for if it's a mixed item thing. But the more normal one I would have is that for a uranium mining train, I would probably have sulfuric acid on the train as well. So you might think then, well, how does that work? How can you set it so that based on, say, the most items in the train or something like that? So they'll go on to explain that one. One of the things that does occur to me on this one is the way it's sort of written. It's not entirely clear to me whether this any item is just a new general signal that we've got, and you can have it in your circuit network and all that sort of stuff, or whether it's entirely limited to trains. You can only put it as a train stop, signal. I hope it's the former, because I think people could come up with some quite clever things for an any item signal. I suspect, however, it is limited just to trains, because there is kind of an any item thing that you can do with circuit conditions already. Maybe it is slightly different. But one of the things that is interesting on this, and I wonder if it auto-completes it when you use it, is that basically you obviously have to have this in both places, for it to do what they're trying to do. But does it have to be there? Because you could have I've got any item signal, and it's just saying, right, if you've got anything on board, that's maximum. And to say this comes back to this point of, working with groups. You could have a group that was all the circuits, and you just say whatever circuit you've got, whatever circuit you've picked up, go to a generic drop off, and then it just, the bots sort out what goes where. It just dumps it out into chests, and the bots then move it to the right place for green signals, green circuits, red circuits, etc. So you could also do that directly. So it could be that it goes to any place, and it's not necessarily any item drop off, but it's your depot or your circuit hub or something like that. And then you specify, right, well, any circuit I know needs to go to that stop, and I just make it the same stop name. Or does it have to have both? If you use the any item at one place, does it have to be carried into the other? I suspect not, and you can do what you want basically. But the key point really is, if you're gonna, in the way they're using it, and it seems to be the most appropriate use case, is that if you are using it as the generic read, content read for the train, then you should really use it as the generic destination for the train. And what it means in terms of replacing it is, if you look here, this appears to be the interrupt in action, I think, in that it's basically saying, right, well, this is the actual interrupt itself. This is how it's written, the generic input here. And what it's done is it's created this temporary drop-off, I think that's what it's saying. This also sort of addresses my point, basically, in that it looks like, from above, where I was saying, well, how does it actually fill up? These are the interrupts for dropping off. And what they've got here is it just item input, where it goes presumably to anywhere. Any station is just called any item input when it's, all the load stations are just called item input. Interesting idea. But then it basically says when it's full, or it's got this circuit tick, whatever that circuit condition they've got on. If one of those is true, then that means it's fulfilled that condition, I think. It's a little difficult to think these through without playing with it, if I'm totally honest. So I'm clearly getting a little confused there. But basically, full cargo inventory is obviously where it's loading up. And as I say, it looks like when it's doing this any item, it pops in the temporary thing and it just fills it with whatever you've got. So this train clearly has 1.7k iron ore in it. And so it's basically, loading up with that instead. When a train is evaluating an interrupt which uses the any item signal, it will check the interrupt conditions against each item in the cargo, and the first one that passes will be the passing item for the interrupt. The passing item will replace the any item in the interrupt target name and target weight conditions. So the bit they don't explain there is what the hierarchy is. They do go on to mention that they sort of have a workaround for this, but it's not clear what the hierarchy is, essentially. So if you've got a train and it's just been loaded in with, iron ore and copper ore and iron plate and, blue circuits, so it's a bit of a random train for some reason. It's loaded up all those things. It then checks what you're trying to do, so this cargo is not equal to 0. But what order does it check those in? And say the first one, because it's not equal to 0, it just means if there's any of that item. So if there's any, iron plate, if there's any copper ore, any of that item, then that is your chosen item. But I say it doesn't quite explain what the hierarchy is. So in here you could see that, think of that. This is the hierarchy, that it will check for copper ore, then it will check for iron ore, then it will check for copper ore, then it will check for coal, then it will check for stone. See what I mean? So there's sort of a hierarchy of which one it checks for, and as soon as one of them is met, that's the one it does first. But you might not want that behaviour. You might want, it's got blue circuits in, they're the most important thing, do them first. So it's not clear to me what the hierarchy is for doing the check. And of course, I suppose if it's doing drop off, if it's dropping off iron plate and then, and copper ore and blue circuits, then it will go to one of those drop-off stations, empty that out, and then it will check the next one and go through. So eventually it would empty itself out, I guess. But I say, you may want it to do that in a particular order. We also have similar signals for any fluid, any fuel, and any signal. Using these signals, the interrupt is more generalised and hands-off, as long as you ensure you have your train stops named consistently. And I would say this is probably getting into the territory of, I always hesitate using the term advanced feature, more familiar user feature, basically. So it feels a bit like an area where we're going to get a lot of posts on the Reddit and the Discord saying, my trains aren't behaving. And I mentioned this before in the when they introduced this aspect, that I can see quite a lot of people getting very confused about it. I mean, people get confused with trains, all the time. It's like half the Reddit posts, basically. Why isn't my train running? Why isn't this, working? And I can just see this being added in, it's a more complex thing, and it requires quite a lot of sort of thinking logic, and it's going to be easy to make mistakes, I think. And adding this generic one feels like it's both a great solution because it reduces the amount that you kind of have to do, and allows you to be quite, generic about things. But then it requires another logical leap of people thinking that through and saying, well, what does that mean, a generic item, and how do I actually manage that? And so the problems I think we're going to get on Reddit are going to be just more complex, and there's going to almost be, a whole massive list of solutions to people's problems that we're going to have to run through. And some of these are going to be quite complicated to diagnose as to why this, why isn't it doing this? Well, is it this? Is it interrupts? So yeah, it could get quite complex, I think. I'll be honest, my sort of recommendation, not that I can give recommendations, but I would suggest this should be locked behind a higher level research, that interrupt should be a, not late game, but it should be part of the train unlocking. A bit like signals are unlocked and automated rail is unlocked, and although they're all locked behind red and green research and everyone just does them all straight away, the idea of that, I think, is that you can use trains, but you don't use signals and stuff when you initially use them. It doesn't really work like that. It doesn't act as any kind of barrier. But that, I think, is the intention. This is a separate function, and so you get a separate research for it. And I would suggest the same for this, and perhaps locking it to blue, so that then it is an actually delayed thing, so that people have an opportunity to play with trains properly, and then they can do the whole interrupt stuff. The disadvantage of that is you could build quite a big train network, and suddenly then you've got to change all your trains to the generic thing, if you know what you're doing. So there's a yin and yang, give and take to it. So yeah, but I say it feels like something that maybe, should be a little bit delayed after people get trains. But anyway, we'll see. But what if I don't have a personal battery equipment Mark II drop-off? So one important thing to make this work is that the game has to be fail-safe for stops that don't exist. In 1.1, if a train stop doesn't exist or is disabled, the stop is completely skipped, ignored in the schedule. This can create a big problem, as a train can just decide to go again to item pickup while already full. So if you've never done that, you never worked with the signal stuff, and you've never done, train limiting and all that sort of stuff, what happens is that if the station it's trying to go to is disabled, you've turned it off through a signal network or condition or what have you, then the train can't go there, and so it then will loop back to its original schedule, and that can cause quite a lot of all sorts of problems, really. If that happens while it's travelling, you could easily get no path signals, no path condition, and basically it just stops because it doesn't know where to go, because suddenly the place it was going to is blocked off. If you've not got a roundabout based system, it's got no way of turning around to go back to its other station. And so it's sat there trying to go to another station. There's loads of problems it can cause, and you have to be a little bit careful with how you'd set up these systems. But basically, if it's trying to go to a place and that place then gets disabled, it'll then just move on to the next thing in the signal, in the list, and that may not be what you actually want it to happen. And even when it does, as that example says there, if it's just going between a pickup place and a drop-off place, and the drop-off place gets disabled, it'll go back round to the pickup, and it's already full, quite probably. So it'll just then try to go to the other place again and get either a no path, or it'll block. Maybe you want that 5 trains to fill up, and it's blocking that station. So all sorts of issues it can cause. So in 2.0, we have changed it so that trains will no path for stops that don't exist. So in other words, rather than trying to get back home, because it's selected the next stop in the signal and it's in the list, and it's stuck essentially. Now it'll just stop and go no path, so it can't get to a station that doesn't exist. One of the reasons this is important is explained in this screen capture here. A train with a stop that doesn't exist goes to no path state. So in this case, there's been an accident, presumably some error or something like that, where personal battery equipment Mark II drop off. Basically, they've put in somehow a battery Mark II into the wagon, and so the generic system, this guy here, has gone, right, we've now got battery Mark II, let's go to Mark II drop-off. And you almost certainly, I can't see why you ever would, won't have a battery Mark II drop-off station. So it's then coming up with a station name, because it does this part automatically. It puts the station name in as an automated replacement, and that doesn't exist, so it doesn't have anywhere to go. Now in the other system, it would have gone back into the schedule and gone to its next stop because it didn't exist. I'm guessing, especially with this interrupt thing, which they didn't quite explain, but I'm just thinking this through, that actually it doesn't have a schedule in the usual sense. It doesn't have you could always set your depot, I guess, but that would require you to actually set it. But it doesn't have a next stop in its thing. It's because it's doing an interrupt. It's doing the go to that station interrupt. So it can't go, oh, well, that station doesn't exist, go to my next one, because that may not be an interrupt. It may not have anywhere to go. So what do you do in that case? Well, you just set it as a no path if you're trying to send it somewhere that doesn't exist. This means that the trains will never do something unexpected, and it will be the player's configuration error causing the train to wait around for better orders. So that's referring back to the fail-safe thing. I mean, when you fail-safe, that is literally, as the name suggests, if there's a fail condition that happens, say, there's a short circuit or something like that, what you want to happen, this isn't the real world, if there's some problem that happens, something breaks, you don't want it to fail catastrophically and cause an explosion or, electrocute someone or something like that. What you want is to fail safe, and that it's not the component that shorts, it's the fuse that blows and just cuts the power. That's failing safe, basically. And so that's the idea here, that if you've caused it to have some problem, then it will just stop, essentially. It won't go travelling around your system, blocking everything up and getting in the way of other trains or all that sort of stuff. It will just wait there. It will just say, right, I've got a problem, I'm here, I'm where you last left me, but I can't do anything. Does it still skip if I disable a stop with circuit network? This leads us on to another change in 2.0. Disabling stops will no longer cause trains to skip the stations and repath. We have had the skipping behaviour in the game for a long time, but effectively using it has always been a bit janky. Since we added train limits in 1.1, the usage has been very limited and can cause a lot of problems if you approach the feature naively. And I have to confess, I don't tend to disable stops. I'll just set the limit to 0, basically, and that's kind of what they're coming on to. For example, if you disable a stop while a train is en route, the train may very well be in a position where it can't path anywhere else, e.g. just turning the corner to arrive. This would cause the train to no path while sticking out onto the main line, causing chaos for the rest of the trains. So, in 2.0, disabled train stops will act as if they have train limit equals 0. So, if a train is on the way and the stop is disabled, it will continue to the stop regardless. Or, if a train is told to go to a disabled stop, it will enter the destination full state and wait until it is enabled. So this was always the advantage of disabling things while they were in transit, was that if you set the train limit to 0 while it's in transit, what it'll actually do is still go to that station. At least I think this is my memory, and this is why I've been using it. And I may be wrong, I may have got confused somewhere, but it still goes to that station. It just like passes through, it'll get there and it'll go, right, there's nothing for me to do. I can't stop here. Let's just move on. But also the other thing is that if the train is if the station stop is disabled, which is much, much, much more likely, you're talking about a mining outpost really, and you've set it with a logic condition that it'll only activate it'll only allow the amount of stops the amount of trains that it can service. Sorry. So what you can do is you can get it to count the number of items in your steel chests, and say, well, if those number of items is above the amount required for a train, then you can open the station. But what you can do as a more advanced version is actually count the amount of stuff in. So if there is 3 trains worth of stuff in your chests, then you can queue up 3 trains to get refueled. Okay, but then you can also use that maths in the opposite way, which says if there's nothing, if you cannot fill a train, your train limit is 0. Okay, and therefore that is a non-station on the signal. But instead of it doing this skip thing, what it does instead is it sits there saying, right, destination 4, I'm waiting for a stop with this name to open up. And so basically if you do the skip, it will act in that same way. It will become a 0 train limit rather than a disabled stop as such. This change will prevent the damage that disabling stops causes, and means you can have a slightly easier time controlling stops with circuit networks. For example, with an artillery outpost, just wire up a chest to read how much ammo is left, and only enable the stop if ammo is empty. This way you don't need to include any combinators to translate the lack of ammo into a train limit. And that's exactly what I was explaining, that's the type of maths you would want to do. And I think the point there essentially, and I don't think they deliberately did it for this, but you can do it a lot simpler. You can just wire up the box. When it goes above 0, I guess, you would enable the train limit, but now it interprets that as 0 rather than completely turning the station off, and also means that you don't need to do this whole train counting thing or content counting thing in order to set the train limit. It's just effectively doing the same thing as a much easier way. Alert for no path. More trains means more chance of something unexpected happening. In Space Age, where the player's attention is split between multiple planets, it is especially important that the player is made aware of problems in the train system. So it only made sense to add an alert for trains with no path. This is a really nice little thing, basically. So we're now going to get a pop-up that basically says, alerts, train cannot find path to destination. See the map for more details. Presumably you can click on that, as with most alerts, and it will take you to exactly where it is. With a new generic interrupt, it means if the train picks up an item for which you have no associated train stop, you will be notified about it and you can decide how to solve it. In case you weren't aware, I mean, they're leaving this until the end, but they've introduced an actual symbol, an icon for no pathing, and they come onto it later, but that's what this orange thing is showing. They're sort of explaining it without having mentioned what the symbol is yet, and it is explained at the end, but that orange thing means no path basically now. And the point really is that we're getting an alert for it. Previously the trains would just sit there with no path, and you'd have to be like, hang on, why is my base completely out of iron, and then hunt down the train that had a no path. It would tell you about no fuel, but we're now getting a no path thing. That feels like a feature that's long been overdue. So yeah, really nice that we're getting that. Easier train dispatching. Another annoyance, which becomes clearer with larger train systems, is the pain of creating and dispatching new trains. With the ability to blueprint trains, it is almost painless, but you still need to manually set them to automatic mode. No longer. Now, when a train blueprint is fully built, importantly this must include fuel requests, it will switch to automatic mode. And then we just got a little video here of the player spamming on a whole load of trains. Note the bots flying out, that's the point about the fuel. And the trains are filled up with the fuel by the bots. They all go through whatever assessment, is in this interrupt train schedule thingy. They select their station to go to, and off they go because they're all on automatic. I'll be honest, I think that's great, but also I hope it's something we can kind of configure. Maybe if you put a train down, blueprint a train down without the fuel in it, then it'll just go onto manual mode. I mean, obviously it won't, it wouldn't move if you didn't put fuel in it. But that seems like a clunky way to control that, because often when I put a blueprint of a train down, I don't actually want it to set off necessarily. I guess I'm thinking in the old school way though, so maybe, for future train networks and how you do them, with this interrupt system, you would want it to set off. I mean, this is clearly an end-game train adding thing. So basically the player is just spamming on a bunch of extra trains because they're realising, I've got too many stations for my trains, I need a lot more trains. So they're just adding a load in and off they're heading. So it's clearly that, type of thing. But I say, if I'm popping down a blueprint of a train, I may well not want it to set off, because I just want to set the trains up and do a load of building first and I don't necessarily want a train heading off, doing random stuff. But as I say, I'm thinking in the old school way there, because, I would be normally associating, the iron ore train with the iron ore station and the iron ore drop-off point, So if you're not doing that and every train is generic, then this is probably the way to do it. But say, I don't know, I feel like I would be doing it with like grouped trains, and if I was adding them on, I'd want to be saying, I suppose you're going to have different blueprints if you want to do it like that. But I'd want to be saying, this train is part of the iron ore group, and this train is part of the, green circuits group, or the all circuits group, or what have you. So maybe I'm still just thinking in the old-fashioned ways. But yeah, it does feel like a nice little thing, especially end game. Spam down a bunch of trains, and particularly remotely. If you're away on Volcanus and you need more trains back on your home planet, this is just going to be so nice to just add them on, and they'll set off. They're all already set to auto is the point. So yeah. This is the last piece of the puzzle. And now, if you need to add another 5, 10, 20, 50 trains to your network, it is just a matter of stamping down the train blueprint as many times as needed. No further manual intervention necessary. Additionally, there were quite a few inconsistencies with blueprinting trains, bugs, and unexpected behaviours, which made it a little bit unreliable if the schedule in the blueprint would actually stick to the new train, and if all the wagons would connect correctly. So we fixed all the cases we could find for 2.0. Train stop priority. Trains generally prefer stations that are closer to them. With static routes and limits, the system worked okay. When you have individual train routes for each item, they always have some consistent level of service for that item. If you have 10 iron mines and 3 iron trains, then you know that you will always have some trains working that route. I would caveat that a bit in that it didn't actually always work great, because what you sometimes really wanted was for the trains to go to the further stations, because your closer stations might be basically clogging up your network with loads and loads of raw ore trains, and actually what you really wanted is the trains to bugger off, to go all the way out to your mining outposts and fill up those from those rather than go to the near ones. So yes, but actually sometimes you really wanted them to go further away. However, with generic schedules and one big bag of trains, it can happen that all trains are busy moving around advanced products and nothing is there to direct trains to the mining outposts, especially as the mining outposts are normally far away on the periphery of the base. So this comes back to my hierarchy thing. So it sounds like maybe there's an implied hierarchy. Well, I suppose there's a proximity hierarchy, isn't there? That just by the nature of how you would probably build your base, your little area making blue circuits is going to be closer to the centre of the base than your iron mine that's absolutely miles away. So if you've got a generic system and it's just looking for which station is open and available and wants to drop off items, if you're green circuit is probably a better example as it's quicker, but if that keeps opening up and it's got circuits available to pick up and it's got a limit of 1 that never goes below 1, all of your trains are just going to go to that thing. You would have a situation if you created a system that was, although I suppose if you use limits that wouldn't matter. You'd have to max out your limits, which would mean a ridiculous number of idle trains. But basically you could do a system where the maximum is always 1 at the station, and you do a 1-to-1, which kind of gets away from the point of what they're talking about. But basically you could set it up so that every drop-off has a corresponding pickup, and that there's an exact 1 train to 1 ratio, so that it's always picking up or dropping off. It's exactly matched. The problem with that is getting it right and not having errors, and it limits some of the things you can do, and so you might end up with loads and loads of trains stacked up at every station, and that's a bit wasteful, really. So the idea here is, if you've got a system where it's just completely generic and it'll go wherever, then you need some other way of controlling it. They also say that another motivation here was the situation of decommissioning old stations. We want the trains already at the stop to get out of here, but oftentimes they would just sit and go, well, my destination is full. So another goal was, when I tell a train to go somewhere manually, I want it to have priority. I always thought it would have had priority because of how it did the manual stop. I mean, I get... maybe not. But the basic point is, so we added the feature of train stop priority. And this is the UI for that, and essentially we've got the enable train limit is there from the old one. I don't actually remember it being a slider, but my brain is a bit wonky today. But then we've got this priority slider, so you can set it a priority between, as it says down here, between 0 and 255, although the slider is more, a 10 to 100 type scale. And basically the idea is you can make them have higher priority. So in this generic system, you could set all of your faraway outposts to 100 priority, and it would tend to go and pick up from the furthest stations. If I'm totally honest, I'm not entirely sure that quite fixes the problem they're talking about, because you just get the reverse effect where all of your trains go and sit at faraway outposts waiting to fill up, because they could, that train limit, you've set that via circuit condition. There could be 5 trains worth of coal or iron ore or what have you that could be filled up. They've all gone to that stop, right? But maybe there isn't really any demand for coal. And so they're just all, the train is sat at the station blocking all the other trains because it can't go anywhere because there's no drop-off. So in other words, what you've done is you've pushed all of your trains out to the furthest reaches, and what you actually still want is you want trains buzzing around in the middle. So I don't know. We'll have to see how well this works. I assume that they will have tested it a lot, and it presumably does. But it does feel like you could set really high priority on your outposts in order to push your trains to go there, and you end up with all of your trains are out in the boonies and none of your bases working. So yeah, we'll have to see if that really does work as intended. And it says the way that it works is that the priority of a train stop has 2 effects. 1. When searching for a destination, trains will prefer a higher priority train stop. 2. When trains are trying to leave a stop, trains at stops with higher priority are dispatched first. So that's interesting. So it's not just when it's going to a station, it's if a train is sat there waiting. So you've got, as I said, in that case, those, so you've got 5 coal outposts and all the trains are sat there waiting for coal to be demanded. As soon as coal is demanded, it will be the one with the highest priority. I mean, you may have set them all to the same priority, but if there's one with a higher priority that maybe you're trying to clear out a coal stop to get rid of it so you can build something else, you set that, whack that priority up, and it empties that station first, that whole outpost first, and allows you to control it in that way. So that's interesting that it prioritizes trains leaving stations as well. Train stops have a default priority of 50, and players can adjust it to any number they want from 0 to 255. The slider in the train stop suggests values from 10 to 90, but it can be more precise with the text field. We also added the ability to set the priority using the circuit network. Now that sounds awesome. That sounds to me almost like a better solution, because then you can set it dynamically. You can say, right, well, there's too many trains in my network, or we're really running out of iron plate. Iron plate is below a threshold. Prioritize iron ore trains, and all of your iron ore trains or stations become higher priority. That sounds awesome. It does sound like you're going to have to do this thing of connecting all of your rail together with the red and green wires, but which is not something I usually do. But I say they've made them free and stuff now, haven't they? So yeah, that sounds like a brilliant one. And I guess you could do it automatically at the station, couldn't you? You could relate the amount of ore that's there. And you could set a fudge factor to it. You could say this is further away, so we want just a general higher priority as your scaling factor. And then based on how much is available there, you multiply the two together and it gives it a much higher priority overall. So yeah, all sorts of really clever things you can do with that. Additionally, there are some special cases where trains are given the absolute max priority of 255, when the player manually tells the train to go somewhere, or when a train has no path or destination fall in the middle of the tracks, i.e. it's not waiting at a train stop. So those are just some special cases where you really want the train to move, so it just defaults to a 255 priority. Icons for train status. Factorio veterans will know well the flying text pop-up of no path and destination fall. These are valuable pieces of information, but it has always felt a bit ugly and distracting. Some people always really hated seeing them in screenshots as well. So, in 2.0, we changed it so that these states are shown to the player with an icon drawn over the locomotive, and we added the train status to the GUI and tooltip. So that's just what I was saying earlier. They're sort of wrapping up with this point, even though they've been using the symbol before. But basically, this is the new no path, and it's a flashing icon because it's a warning, and it will give us a little pop-up, on the thing, so we can press it and go straight to that train. And what before would happen is you would have this text that floated up, no path, no path, no path. And then for this one, this is destination fall. And basically this is now a waiting symbol, but it's just a fixed icon that'll change when the status changes. So yeah, just a nice little thing, I think, nice little addition. The no path icon flashes to let you know something is wrong. Destination fall is just a solid icon shown in alt mode. These should make it easier to tell at a glance when what a train is up to, without having to do the mental pause to verify there is no flying text notification coming soon. And what they're referring to there is that was the tricky part to it. You'd have to sit and wait just a little bit to see if the no path was going to pop up, because it would, float the text, and then it would have a little pause while there was nothing there, and then it would float the text, and then a little pause, and so that's a nice little side effect where it kind of gets rid of that. Wait, has that got no path? Oh yeah, okay, it's still got no path. It's just a nice little tweak, As always, dispatch your thoughts to us at the usual places. Right, so it's another tough one for speculation. I can't really think of anything, to be honest with you. There aren't, that I can tell, any kind of hidden little things in here. There's no Easter eggs that I could see. I was puzzled by this. I don't remember having numbers on, because these are Spidertron remotes. I don't remember having numbers on them, but so I don't know not entirely sure what that means. But that's just me not remembering. Normally it would be coloured, so the thing would be coloured according to what Spidertron it is, so you could tell which controller it was for. I know these are now free things, but I don't remember the number. But that's just me not remembering anything. I do like this overall. It's another one that feels like a lot of features are still in development, if you see what I mean. You would expect this. I mean, it literally says at the beginning, they've introduced the original version 3.8.9. They've introduced that. Then they've played with it a bunch and come up with some refinements. Now they could be doing that they added it in, 2 years ago, and they've made a note at the time explaining it, and then they've just put that into the into the blog, and then 6 months later they realised these updates, and so they've created another blog, and so there's like this big backlog of blogs or something. That could be what's happening. It doesn't feel like it. It feels like 3.8.9 is when the feature had basically been in the game, for a while, and so they were telling us about it. And then they've played with it a bunch, and then they've made these changes just recently, sort of thing. So could be either of those, but it's starting to feel like a lot of these features are still quite in development. What I'm building up to there is my thought that perhaps this expansion isn't coming this year, and that maybe we should brace for it being a bit further off. That's obviously a little disappointing if I'm honest, because it's been in development for so long. But I'd much rather have it, feature complete and good and lots of stuff in it and no bugs and all that sort of stuff. So much rather have that than some rushed, half-arsed effort, basically. So it's just another thing that makes me think that maybe there's quite a lot still to do for the actual release. It is a year away. That is a long time, but we know they like to do quite an extended playtest to, really test all the features. So, I'm wondering if this is another hint that perhaps there's a lot more still going into the game, and so maybe it's a bit further off, a bit like I suspected with the art. I did also, I've mentioned a few times, it would be nice, as someone who plays the game a lot, I know quite a lot of players just play the same map, continuously, but someone who's, starts new maps quite often and does mods and all that sort of stuff, being able to kind of, another sort of solution to this is set it up once and reuse it, and you just have a schedule that you have. I mean, I suppose if schedules are now in train blueprints and don't matter for your specific game, you can sort of do that by blueprinting the train, and then it just has the whole generic set of things. And especially with this generic version, it's got you if you always build a depot, you always build a refuel station, you always build a generic, you always have the generic, use the generic input. By having it on a blueprint, you've then carried that between different games, so it's sort of a workaround. But it would be nice, particularly things like, my personal bugbear is the personal logistics system, and especially if we're going to get so many new items, so many new buildings, that setting that up every time by hand is just an absolute pain in the bum. And so I'd like the ability to save that as a blueprint. It wouldn't really be a blueprint, but save that setup for myself and carry it between games, and then I can just when I get to a point where that matters, I can just import it and off we go. And that would be useful for all sorts of things, if I'm totally honest. That's as good as I can come up with for speculation. There's not a lot to say on this. It would be nice to get a bit more detail on some of the proper space age planets and things like that. It feels like a while since we had anything like that. But I do really like these features. This is good stuff, and it's going to make the game more interesting, more fun. I really do like the fact that some of the, like the priority is settable by the circuit network. That feels like a really fun thing to play about with in controlling your system and setting up your system. Being able to use the distance, for example, or just some modifier that you've put on to, set the priority for the train distance, and for you to do it via the network to say, right, well, how much iron do we actually need and how much have we got, and set the priority of the station to that. And it's open because it's got stuff there, but it's higher priority because this is what we need more of. Or I've put a FUD factor on that it biases towards further away, or a particular station that I want to, a particular stop, particular outpost that I want to clear out. So feels like there's a lot of fun stuff we can do there. I did find the no path and the destination stuff really ugly, if I'm totally honest. I'm glad that that's now an icon. It did just feel, look what rubbish just floating this text up, basically. So yeah, it's a nice little thing. But yeah, I don't have anything really much more than that. I did wonder about popping this up again. So last time, as I was going through in the edit, I spotted... Well, actually, no, it wasn't in the edit. I'd seen it while I was recording it, but I just wasn't at all sure what was going on. So we had this icon here, and it's the one I put on my thumbnail for the video. But what I did is I edited this out because I don't know what this shadow is. If you're watching and you've played a mod, this could well be something in SpaceX, because the example given here is SpaceX. And I've not actually played SpaceX. I've watched a few playthroughs, but I've never watched SpaceX. I've never played SpaceX. So this could be the shadow of something on SpaceX, very easily. And so if you know what it is, let me know. I did a community post pointing it out last time, but I wasn't confident enough. But since we've basically got nothing to speculate about this time, I did do this, and if we blow it up a little bit, it's this thing on the left here, basically. So what is that, essentially? Because one of the things with it is that the shadows in Factorio are at a fixed angle. They don't move as the sun moves. They just, when it's daylight, there's a shadow and it's at a fixed angle that implies the sun is off, in that direction. So if that's the shadow that, that is a vertical thing, it's goes straight up, it's a flue, and this is another one, this is well, I think that's meant to be a fractionation column, but this is a flue, where the burning stuff comes out of, and, venting excess gas and burning it and that sort of thing. So when they flip it round, it becomes that flue thing is the thing, and now we've got these flipped around icons. It's the fractionation column is the shadow that we see there. And you notice it's always at an angle, particularly if they're high, to give it the illusion of kind of depth and, the direction of the sun. So in that case, what would produce a shadow that goes directly to the right? And again, this whole bit, if you know what it is, let me know. If it's something in SpaceX, that's great. But I'm wondering if it's some new building, basically, because I went through the shadows. I really did go through the shadows of existing buildings, and I did not recognise it. Again, it could be something in the vanilla game, but I just didn't recognise this. And also, as I say, the angle doesn't make sense, because if this is a straight up thing, yeah, like this out here, you would expect the shadow to be coming out at an angle. So in order for that to be, horizontal, the thing itself would need to be sloping upwards, if you see what I mean. It would need to be sloping downwards, and that would then compensate for the shadow coming the other way. So is this something to do with like launching things, or maybe it's a comms thing? It's part of an antenna or some sort of system to communicate with your other planets. This does look like it could shoot something, or it almost to me looks like a flamethrower, but I don't know. Maybe it lobs something over, and as I say, this is where we get into the territory of it could easily be some SpaceX thing. It's something for firing things up into orbit or something like that I've just never seen the shadow of. But it also looks like it's supporting itself and things like that. But what was interesting to me in particular, if it was something sort of being squirted out or something like that, you'd expect that to be a continuous tube, continuous line, but it isn't. So I did wonder if it's maybe some antenna or something like that. And I say, this is where I get a whole bunch of comments from everybody going, don't be doing it, it's the thingy. But so I didn't recognise it, so I am puzzled as to what that is, and would love for you to tell me. I hope you enjoyed today's Friday Facts video and might consider coming back for another one. If you want to chat about the latest Factorio Friday Facts, then you can find me live streaming Factorio every Saturday on my Twitch channel, @Trismegistus. Thanks for watching. Cheers. This is the last piece of the puddle. Puddle?